question I get all the time, because I own both, is which bike should I get? The BMW S1000RR or the Aprilia RSV4? So here's my comparison of these two amazing superbikes. I want to give you enough considerations to make your decision no matter what year or what price range you're talking about. For reference, these are my two bikes. First, this started life as a 2010 BMW S1000RR that I bought new back then. It's had every modification imaginable done to it, so it's a little bit biased that way. You can see the carbon body, wheels, titanium exhaust, everything. It's recently been refitted with a 2018 engine and electronics. So it's going to be very comparable to a 17 or 18 model S1K. Second is the Aprilia RSV4 1100 Factory. Now this bike, the only mods that have been done are the carbon wheels, otherwise it's stock with some graphics. This bike was purchased to replace the 18 RSV4 RR1000 that I had that unfortunately fell to its death at the antlers of the Hill Country Assassins one morning. So many people find themselves trying to decide between these two bikes for good reasons. First, they're both European. So if you don't want a Japanese bike, then that rules out a lot of the brands and leaves you with very few. Ducati's a European brand, but it's kind of considered in a higher price bracket than what these two would be. And you also have bikes like Triumph, etc. But really, if you're talking about the two kind of closest related bikes in terms of performance and cost and what you get for the money, these two are it. In fact, back in 2010 when I bought the BMW, I test drove the new RSV4 the day before I test drove the BMW S1000RR. The reason I ended up choosing the BMW at that time was because I already had an Aprilia Mille in the garage and I wanted to, I guess, diversify my stable. The first thing I suggest is to figure out how much money you want to spend on the bike. What that figure is going to do is help you kind of narrow down what year of each bike with what features you're able to afford. Both bikes come in a base model, obviously, but both have also offered a upper tier version over the years as well. The BMW has offered things like the HP model and the M model, and the Aprilia offers a factory version like this one. Let's look at this table that summarizes the model prices over the last decade or so of both of these bikes. Now let's say your budget is $15,000. That means you'd be looking at somewhere in this range for the BMW and somewhere in this range for the Aprilia. Before we get into features and performance of each of these bikes, let's talk about the biggest difference between them, which is also the biggest component of the bikes, and that's the engine. The S1000RR was BMW's first attempt at a sport bike, and the reason they did it is because they suffered the same plague as Harley-Davidson. Their average rider was getting older and older, and as that generation died off, there just wasn't the next generation of younger riders interested in the bikes they offered. So what better way to get young riders interested in BMWs than come out with a very high-performing sport bike at an affordable cost? The Germans had watched the Japanese succeed with these high-revving i4 engines, which was very different than the standard boxer engines you'd find in BMWs at the time. In typical German fashion, they said, "Wir können es besser," and they did. With their first effort out of the gate, BMW released a 193 horsepower machine for a base price of only $13,800, which was very comparable to its Japanese competition at the time. They also, in true German overachieving fashion, released an electronics package that instantly became the gold standard in motorcycle safety equipment, with things like anti-lock brake system, dynamic traction control settings, and an upshift assist as well, like this bike had. Now, I walked out the door with a fully optioned bike in 2010 for a price of $17,750 that included tax, title, and license, which was a hell of a bargain for a bike with all those features. The Italian bike over here has a very different background. Aprilia already had a rich racing history and a lot of experience building sport bikes. Now the old Mille, like I had before, was equipped with the Austrian-made Rotax V-twin engine. When it was time to upgrade models, Aprilia decided to bring the engine in-house, and they created their own V4 engine that they designed and built internally. The V4 is what they felt was the best blend of torque and power in an engine configuration, And it wasn't so far from the V-twin that we all loved in the older Aprilias versus had they gone all the way to an i4. Now when Aprilia went from the V-twin to the V4 configuration, they stuck with the 1000cc displacement with obviously smaller pistons. Recently on this model, they also went up to the 1100cc, and that's putting out 217 horsepower. Having owned both 1000 before it and the 1100 now, I can tell you it was a lot more drastic going from the 201 horsepower to the 217 than what I expected. Step 2 is looking at the features of both of these bikes and understanding what's important to us as we go to choose one. Now, none of us want to be fooled by marketing, but these are our bikes. They're what we love to do, love to ride, and we not only enjoy them, we want to depend on them as well. So we want to make sure we look at the components, make sure they're manufactured by brands we trust, and make sure we understand the value of those components when they're added on the motorcycle. One of the first components we look at on bikes like this are the brakes. You want to go fast, you need to stop fast. Now both of them would come from the factory with Brembo calipers. The Aprilias also tend to come with Brembo master cylinders versus the Nissan that you'd find on a BMW. Now on mine, I did change out the brake components because I was getting some loss in stopping power on the way down the mountains in Colorado with it. So I ended up putting on a Brembo RCS19 master cylinder. I went with monoblock Brembo calipers, new floating rotors, and I am much happier with the brake system on this bike now. On the F11, even though it had a Brembo master cylinder, I chose to change it out for an RCS19 because I like that firmer feel compared to the 17 that came with the bike. When I upgraded the S1K to the 18 engine and electronics, I had the option to go with electronic suspension as well. I did not do that because I could only find 1 or 2 people that actually preferred the electronic suspension. So I opted out of the electronic suspension and I upgraded instead to a set of Öhlins front and back for the bike. As my skills are getting better, I wanted a little bit better feel for the road. So I did that here, but I stuck with the manual Öhlins. In fact, that's one of the unique things about a 2019 RSV4 Factory is it has the manual Öhlins on this one. So these two have almost the same suspension system now. So this 19 is the only Aprilia RSV4 1100 Factory that has the 1100 engine and the manual Öhlins. After this year, everything went to electronic suspension. Now, just because things are a more expensive brand doesn't mean they're always better. For example, on the BMW, I've been told that the steering damper from BMW is actually a better product than the Öhlins one. So do a little research before you just buy something for the sticker on it. Something that I really didn't give any consideration to when I bought the old Aprilia Mille years ago was the dash and functionality, because everything was pretty standard. You had your big tack and the speed, and that was about it. On these things, if you buy anything new from either of these manufacturers, you're going to get the fancy LCD screen with a whole bunch of menus and graphics, and it's going to look really nice, and you're going to be able to do anything from that menu. So all of them are going to have a very similar functionality and features, right? You're going to have things like the analog brakes, you're going to have the different settings, you're going to have dynamic traction control or APRC, whatever they want to call it on there, all the different menus, options, lap timers, launch, whatever else you can imagine are going to be included. So what you want to start looking at is not so much features perhaps as ease of use, because you don't want to be shifting through all these menus while you're trying to ride and pay attention to the road. Now, that's with anything new. If you're looking back a little bit, however, with the BMW being an 18 and the Aprilia being a 19, even if you look back at the 18 version of the Aprilia, you can see that that dash looks so much nicer. It's got a nice, modern, crisp screen to it, a lot of cool graphics, and it's a long ways ahead of the kind of archaic looking BMW, even after the 18 upgrade. Now, there's some of us that really like an analog tachometer like the BMW had too, though. So it's kind of to each their own. There's still a lot of functionality with something like the BMW in an 18 model or even the older ones. It's just not as fun getting there because it's kind of a dull screen. These are sport bikes, but the creature comforts are kind of nice to have, especially if you're doing a long trip. So you want to think about comfort of the seats. To be honest, I kind of prefer this Aprilia seat. It is really surprisingly comfortable for a sport bike. Now, the seat that I have on the BMW is a little bit of a racier HP seat, so I don't expect it to be as comfortable. The stock seat was pretty good. It was good enough for me to ride across the country, so can't really complain about that either. Both of these bikes now have cruise control. The BMW has heated grips on both sides, which, you know, honestly, even here in Texas, it gets cold enough that those are nice to have sometimes. And they both have shift assist up and down now. Now, just because you choose your brand, like let's say you decide you want the Aprilia, that still may leave some options between, well, do I get a base model or do I get the factory model? So you want to look at all the features and different components and see what's worth it. If you're looking at the factory and all you really want is the Öhlins front forks, then you might be better to just buy the base bike and put the forks on yourself. It may cost you less than the delta between the base and the factory model. So when you're looking at those premium models, just make sure you understand what's included, what's not, figure out what it would cost to do that yourself, and then decide, is it worth messing with or is it easier to just buy the upgraded model? You're buying a sport bike, so you're obviously concerned about performance. So obviously they're both high power machines. Unless you currently drive a MotoGP bike, you're probably not going to be disappointed with either of these bikes in terms of performance. Another consideration is how easy is the bike to work on? It depends on how much of your own wrenching you do. You may not want to even change your oil, or maybe you want to tackle some really big upgrades for the bikes. I can't say that I have any complaints about either bike for what I've worked on them so far. Now on the BMW, I've had the entire engine apart, rebuilt it myself. The service manual was all laid out really well. I will say that in my past, anything German engineering wise is very clever in how they're made, how they are to work on, OCD level of instructions, the service CD, all that kind of stuff. Again, no complaints about the Italians over here. I haven't been into near that depth of the bike as I have on the BMW, but from what I've worked on it so far, no complaints. There's actually pretty good service manuals available for this as well. It's just not put together quite like the Germans do. Reliability is a big concern. These are performance machines. They're squeezing a lot of power out of a small engine. If you were to take, say, a Mustang 5-liter and squeeze as much horsepower per liter out of that engine as what these do, you'd be talking about over 1,000 horsepower out of that Mustang. And you and I both know that if that was a 1,000 horsepower engine, it's probably going to have reliability issues. So you're squeezing a lot of power out of a small engine, you're revving high, you need to take care of the bikes. That means not only things like regular oil change, but one of the biggest things you need to do is just let them warm up sufficiently. Give them 20 minutes, 20 miles, let them warm up before you start cracking the throttle on it. There's nothing wrong with driving them aggressively. In fact, they're better if you put some heat to them. If you drive them the way they're made, you don't want to just idle around town on these on the way to the bar, or they're not going to do well either. But just be smart about it. Drive it the way it was intended, but take care of it. The other thing I'll mention is that Aprilia still uses nylon tanks. Now, with modern ethanol used in the States, that has caused a lot of problems. In fact, my old metal tank on the old Aprilia was fine, but the tubing inside of it got disintegrated by the ethanol. Obviously, newer bikes have proper tubing and seals and everything else for the ethanol, but it's better to move the bike, make sure you ride it, don't just let it sit in the corner for 6 months. There could be issues. I'm not saying there are. I think Aprilia's probably figured out how to coat them better by this point, but some of the earlier ones, you may have some issues with ethanol causing the tanks to swell, to crack, to have issues mounting them when you put them back on. So just some things to consider versus the aluminum tank over here on the BMW will never be a problem. On a related note, what is the service like on the bike? So let's say that you buy your machine and then you realize that you've got to travel 4 hours to get an oil change to find a dealer. I can tell you they can be very different to work with. When I went and looked at Aprilia, they were happy to put in a tail tidy, offered to throw in a race ECU, I think, discounts. I mean, they were just so much easier to work with compared to the BMW dealer, who basically said, take it like it is, and I do about beg to get a $100 service CD out of them. That's on the sales end. Just because you have a close service department doesn't mean you have a good service department. So you want to do a little research, see how they are to work with, or you may end up traveling 4 hours to a dealer anyway. Usually it's easier to find a BMW motorcycle dealer than an Aprilia dealer. They're just a smaller manufacturer. They don't have as many dealerships. I'm lucky enough that Aprilia's largest dealer, AF1, is just a little bit north of me. So that's where I can buy and get anything done and get parts in that. Not everybody's that lucky. So research your dealer network, your service, how are they going to be to work with it. And remember, just because they're easy to buy from doesn't mean they're going to be easy to work with when something breaks. The girlfriend that I used to love partying with became the wife that I couldn't stand getting dropped off by 2 dudes at 2 in the morning. So just because they're good at selling you a bike doesn't mean they're going to be good at servicing your bike. Now for the less tangible items. Motorcycles are fun. So there are these things about them that you can't put numbers to, that you just, either you like or you don't, right? The BMW is just a precision tool at this point. It is highly engineered. This particular model, I have lightened to almost 400 pounds, so it cuts through anything. Now I haven't done near as much work to lighten the Aprilia, but it is a much heavier bike. However, it feels really solid. And it's got that big V engine in it, which has a grunt and a growl to it. And for me, coming from Harley Chopper World and the old V-twin Aprilia I had, I love the V sound. I love how it sounds, I love how it feels. It has the growl, it has the rumble, but it's still high revving, so it's really a cool exhaust note. Some of you may prefer the sound of an i4. It's a little bit of a racier engine, especially when you're popping through with a quick shifter. For me as an engineer, I love the technical aspects of this BMW. Everything from the design to how it is to work on, the precision, the OCD engineering of it, love it. Style will always go to the Italians over the Germans. Think about a Porsche versus a Ferrari. You're always going to goo and ga over the Ferrari for the styling of it, right? Now there's nothing wrong with a Porsche, they're just a very understated design, and they do their bragging, if you will, with their performance, with their engineering. Same kind of thing when it comes to motorcycles. It's the same personalities of a German vehicle versus an Italian vehicle. In fact, with the style of the BMW, it is a bit unique in how they came up with it. The engineers decided that they wanted to package it and engineer it as proper and efficient as possible. What they ended up with was asymmetrical headlights and asymmetrical side panels. You've got the gills on this side, one big hole here, kind of a trapezoidal type and a bit of a round one. And they caught a lot of grief for it, to be honest, from the market, but it kind of gave them a little bit of a personality. And even though it wasn't necessarily intended style, it gave them a unique look and stood out from the Japanese counterparts. Now in newer models, they've actually done away with the asymmetrical headlights, which they were given into peer pressure, I get it, but it's kind of too bad because that's what gave them some of that character. I honestly cannot imagine anybody having either of these vehicles and not being just ecstatic about them. They're engineering marvels. They look like they're doing 3 digits sitting still here in the garage. The performance is way more than most of us will ever be able to truly utilize, but it's fun as hell to try. So now you know the reason why if somebody asks me, which should I choose? The BMW S1000RR or the Aprilia RSV4? My response is always, there's a reason that I have both.
Subscribe to my YouTube channel below and let's celebrate turning fuel and air into adrenaline.